I'm excited. This is episode 2 of the Book Labs podcast. We had a number of different ideas slotted for podcasts, but I think you made a wise decision, John, in saying that you've got so many people talking to you about writing books and using AI. And of course, you're in both spaces, that it just makes sense to have an episode on writing books with AI.
Yeah, no, I think the whole thing that sort of I had a great conversation with a sort of AI quantum computing expert, and he was telling me he's a very wealthy man. He's made a ton of money in selling technology businesses, and he was telling me how he knows like 10 or people colleagues of his that are writing books fully with AI, and like I'm still on the fence, whether I want to write a book using AI or not. I probably will eventually. I don't know if it's my next book, but the question that comes up then is this process that sort of Derek created that I've been a participant with for a number of years, the Frankendraft Method. Do I need it if I'm going to write the book with AI? And I think what we want to do is answer in this podcast is answer is absolutely yes. You still want to write a great book, and you still want the book to be you, right? And because there's no again, I don't want to get into the debate about like what AI does. Does it plagiarize? There's definitely a whole ethics part, but like we're going to stay away from that. The thing is, both can be true. You can use AI to help you write your book, but I think you still need this sort of process of again we believe that the Frankendraft method is the right way to write the book, particularly nonfiction, which is business books or some sort of expertise that you have that you want to finish. So like writing books, and again, I think the first thing, right, is like. And I believe this in everything. This whole question, I don't want to go too far into the question of like, is AI sentient? What about AGIS? You know what? Go talk to somebody else about that nonsense. AI, for me, is a tool. I use it as a tool. I think it has incredible emergent behavior. It can reason. It has some form of cognition. I talked about this in the epilogue of my Rebels of Reason book. But for me, I use it. It's like a massive library of information that I can pull. I don't just pull out a book and say, okay, that's the paragraph. This is what I'm going to put in there. I read the paragraph. I read another paragraph for another book. I read another chapter. I read a whole book, and I formulate these ideas. With my Deming book, that was a process that took 2 years because most of the information wasn't online. It was shortened maybe about 35% with the Rebels of Reason, even though we wrote everything ourselves. All the information we had was digital. So these tools to help you write, research, formulate your ideas, come up with a better sentence, think about a better word, or challenge AI to sort of challenge it on a concept that you have. Those are all incredible tools, or even like I'll tell you some examples that I think I used in Rebels of Reason, which is, I know I used, where there's something that was just common knowledge of some term. Yeah, let me let AI sort of, instead of me having to sort of explain that out, let me let AI take a first shot at it and maybe change the words a little bit. So the answer is the stuff we're going to talk about here, sort of pros and cons, the tools, but the answer like is definitively, I still believe you need this. If you have that book that you want to write, that book's sort of burning in your soul, because if it's not, then turn the radio off right now, but if it is, then like, yes, like this, like it is, like you're going to need both, even if you choose to use AI, or you may choose not to use AI, because again, the process is pretty fun.
Whenever AI first came out, I was in the camp that I think most writers and plenty of people in the publishing industry still are, which is to distrust it, to dismiss it, and to fear it. And I had an author that encouraged me to use it, to do like some draft work whenever we were kind of prototyping, kicking around some ideas. And then, of course, after working, you really introducing me to, you training me, showing me, I guess, guiding me through how to effectively use AI. Now that I'm on this side of it, I see AI as being kind of like using a ghostwriter, right? There are plenty of people that don't use a ghostwriter because that means you didn't write your book yourself. And there are people that can do that. You can
Yeah,
go pay somebody and they'll create a manuscript and you can put your name on it. That's not ghostwriting. That's fraud. But if you're using a ghostwriter may be able to or should be able to take, your ideas and present them as best and as fluently and as fluidly as possible. But at the end of the day, the ghostwriter can only work with the content that you provide. If you've got a great idea, then a ghostwriter can help you create a great book. If you've got a terrible idea, there's only so much,
that's right. That's right. Yeah, it is the author. I mean, that's like I remember like when we were thinking about the Deming book. I mean, one of the options that you do have, and sort of and I don't like to call Derek a ghostwriter, but he is. But our project, the Deming project, was not your traditional ghostwriting. We had a stand up every Friday. We co-wrote stuff together. I wrote like 80,000 words in that for that book. Derek just did a better job of assimilating it. Like, he's a great writer. I'm a good concept person. I got great ideas, but Derek puts that beautiful flair on my ideas. So this collaborative method, it's Lennon McCarthy, although not at that level. But I always felt the sort of fear. But I started hearing all the other people that when you sort of ask them, like, famous books, that it was like, oh yeah, it was ghostwritten. Oh, it was ghostwritten. It was ghostwritten. Now the question to Derek's point is like, what involvement did you have? And there's some ghostwriters are like, I'll talk to you for a few weeks. I'll come back to you in 6 months, and we'll have the book. Like, yeah, no, that's not how I want to write books. But I think one of the things I think I've said this. I have a book in the queue. We sort of joke that like when I die, my wife put a kill switch on it because it's going to piss off the whole industry. It's called Digital Confidential. Someday we'll get it out there, but it's like 80% done. But to give you an example, Derek, not to go too personal, but Derek's a pretty staunch Christian. I'm, sort of all over the map. But in that book, as I read it, we taped, I put all my concepts into place. We went through all the sort of ideas of my career. There's a book about my career, all my startups. Derek is writing like a drunken sailor with his cursing. So he definitely assumes the personality. So like and now we've been working together so much that like, sort of like it's easy for him to capture my personality in the writing style. But yeah, like I was sort of reading this, I'm like, this is Derek saying all these cusses. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, okay, so what is this sort of the if we had to look at, you have this great Bill Gates quote. I thought was interesting.
yeah. Whenever we were talking the other day about this, really should be the second episode is writing books with AI. The Bill Gates quote came to mind. He said, the first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. If you don't know really what you're doing, if you don't have a good process, a good guide, and you just say, I want Chat GPT to write me a book, it can only magnify the effort that you're putting in. If you don't have great ideas, great concept, if you don't know how to bring it all together, it'll do whatever you ask. That doesn't mean it will do it well, and it doesn't mean that it's going to do a better job than you would have done yourself. But if you know what you're doing, and you use AI, it can take you so much further. I'll tell you what, as an example, as like a minor example of AI. So whenever I first started, first several years, whenever I would be working with an author, I would record all the audio, um, and then upload it to a computer. And then I had a transcriptionist in Kansas City, Kathy. She was my transcriptionist for years. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars for Kathy to transcribe, the hours and hours and hours of conversations. And then she'd have to send all of that back. Then I'd have to go through it to figure out, well, this part pertains to that. And this section we're talking about that. And here's this story, but it doesn't really relate to that. And John, now that we've got AI, I mean, I'm on Otter, and it
Yeah,
not
yeah,
only transcribes, but transcribes in real time.
yeah, no, it's crazy. Yeah, no, I mean like that whole thing. But I mean, even the help you sort of like I use AI even in examples where like I get some bulletins about security and particularly about AI security, which I'm always looking for vulnerabilities of, to sort of inform executives. And I realized, what I do now is I read the whole thing, and a lot of the vulnerabilities, not that I don't care about them, but they're about infrastructure. They're about I really just want to focus in on anything that's related to sort of AI, the current state of AI and vulnerability, security vulnerabilities. So now I realize, well, I was wasting my time. I just loaded into, sort of ChatGPT or Claude. Sort of my go-to is ChatGPT, but for most things, except for coding, Claude for coding. What I do is I literally load it in there and I just say, hey, can you summarize all the stories related to AI? And it just saves me, probably, the whole thing probably takes about 30 minutes to go through it normally. Now I'm down to like 10 minutes, just another great example, why go through all these articles. And I, like the first couple of times I double checked, okay, did it miss this? Did it not? But it's like as accurate as I am reading through it. So I mean, again, that's the general idea is and I think back to the Frankendraft method is, I've sat in on one particular, those two that we did with like subject matter experts, and to watch that person think they have an idea and then going through this sort of like process of like helping yourself draw out that narrative, I still believe that's an asynchronous process, or should be an asynchronous process to AI. Because once you have that, now you can play with AI to see what it looks like. But the idea, like I watched one where the guy came in, me and Derek were working with a potential author, and they thought they were going to write a book about AI. And next thing you know, they're basically telling a story how they're trying to write a book for their kids about how they need to understand AI in the future.
Yeah.
And that was not like the plan, right? And that system like draws that out of you. Again, that person could have walked in and typed, "Hey, write me a book. I think I got this idea about AI. Kind of write this. Give me a outline of chapters," and missed that whole beautiful thing that they had laying on the table, which was when it was said and done, they were like having these aha moments as they were explaining. Anyway, there's just so much more to, I think, the duality of using your human intuition of the story that you believe you want to write. And, sort of like Bill Gates's quote is that, you can magnify the efficiency of a really good idea that is uniquely yours, or you can magnify the inefficiency of that potential beautiful story, again, without the right sort of sets of tools. And, again, this is 15 years in the works of how Derek's been producing books. And so quality books are still going to be read by people.
Yeah. I reject the dichotomy of black or white, good or evil. We can use AI or we can't use
That's right.
AI.
That's right. Yeah, no.
It is a tool like any other tool. If you use it right and ethically, you can do amazing things with it. If you use it wrongly, you can commit fraud with it. But at the end of the day, it's a tool, and it's up to you as to how you use it. And that's really kind of the point of this podcast
Yeah,
episode.
and just to throw a little, scare factor in it. When my last book, I talked to a couple of publishers about. Derek and I decided. Derek is at the end of the day my mentor for all things writing. Decided to self-publish. I mentioned. Oh yeah, this is actually a good story too. One of the first things we did with AI is, as we'd finish sections of the book, especially in a historical book, I would go into multiple models and say, can you evaluate, so they're using this idea of what they call LM as a judge, but have the AI evaluate the correctness, the structure, all that stuff. And so that became my first sort of entree into like a brilliant tool. Because if you remember when we wrote Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge, we were done after about 14, but then we spent almost another 6 or 8 months in revisions, like sending the first couple of people, like coming, getting feedback, and then going to the second tier. I mean, I think we had 8 revisions before we finally, cut the tape. And like that in Rebels of Reason was incredibly shortened because we felt so confident of the process of AI being the first, second, and third and fifth reader. We still went to human evaluations, but like, there was so many things that would catch, like, oh my goodness, I'm totally and that was the thing about the evaluation process. The evaluation process in the human evaluation process was you had to send somebody the manuscript, you had to wait for them to read it, then they literally would come back, and some would literally be very little input. Some people were like amazing; they'd color code the sections. But as you saw multiple things, you were able to say, "Oh, wow, I totally missed the transition, not explaining the transition from chapter 2 to chapter 3 that was in my head, but it wasn't in the paper." Like AI caught those kind of things. Like, and it was like, so there's a great sort of, like how we started finding out that we can use AI incredibly effectively, very much on us. But here's the thing: I was telling one of the publishers that I was potentially going to work with, and the first thing they said, and I don't want to scare you, but the first thing they said, do not mention that publicly anywhere. So the publishers are still concerned about books being written with AI. Right. So I don't know where that all falls out, but I would tell you that I heard that on multiple occasions of the publisher saying, "Yeah, don't try not to say that you did that anywhere publicly." Like that. So there is some little bit of fear about the publishers now, whether you self-publish or use a publish. But the fact that they're scared about it means there's some dragons in the water, or dragons in the caves. So I don't know.
And I get it. But again, they're coming from the idea of assuming that you went to Chat GPT and said, "I want you to write me a
Right.
book on saved loss."
Yeah.
Like I had a guy from Eastern Europe one time. I can't remember which country, but he had the money, he had the means. He was getting ready to move to America. He wanted to kind of make use the book as the tip of the spear for establishing himself as an entrepreneur. And we went through all of this, and I was like, "Well, what do you want to write about?" And it was about weight loss. And I said, "Well, okay, well, what are you a health guru? Are you a fitness coach?" "No, I don't know anything about it. You're going to have to, like, that's basically that's on you. I know that weight loss is going to be a great selling." I'm like, that's not how it works. That's
Con,
not.
con, what you just pointed out is what everybody's starting to learn with AI in general. Like there was prompt engineering. Now there's sort of context engineering, right? Like, to say lively, right? This not just for all use of AI. What everybody's realizing, AI is brilliant if you bring context, right? So I didn't make the connection, but like context matters in writing a book. Like for me, context was a 10-year journey of trying to understand Dr. Deming and what he meant and what he was doing. What was my day job related to things that came up about Deming? How I used it effectively here, but not there. In AI, same thing. I've been spending. I started playing with sort of GPT models in late 2019, early 2020, right? So we got almost 5 years of this stuff that I've been 4.5 years. I decided to write a book about AI, right? So it complemented, like, some of my day job was helping people build vector databases for their documentation so they could use LLMs to answer questions in chatbots instead of looking stuff up. Same time, I'm researching the history of vectors, sort of neural networks and how highly dimensional. Anyway, I can go off the deep end here, but the thing about those two books is context matters. And then, the other thing, one thing I think, we'll encourage in the workshop too is Derek always sort of, as we're working through these things, he calls them botchgalupisms, right? Which, most people know that. For the people that don't know me, that might be listening to this, I used this moniker name for years called botchgaloop. I won't even go into where I got it from, but like, he's always like, every time we're talking about a story, here's a great story of a story. When we were writing the Deming book, a big part of Deming book is Deming's impact pre, during, and post World War II of quality. And so a big part of what was happening during World War II, Deming was significantly involved with the quality of the war effort, which ultimately was the war effort success. And we were talking about, like, the Rosie the Riveter story, and we were going to write about Rosie Riveter, and we had found a really great story. And we were just having this conversation about my mother was in Brooklyn. She worked at Brooklyn Navy Yards, and that's where they sort of, like, built a lot of the ships and all. And he's like, "Dude, we got to put that in the book." And so we have this whole we built the narrative how my mom was trying to figure out how to work. She went to a secretarial school, a prominent, like, high-end secretarial school, because it was like there was no managerial jobs. She couldn't find a job in Manhattan. The Pearl Harbor happens, basically we're in the war. They're hiring everybody that can walk, breathe. And she's basically managing, a pool of secretaries during the war effort, to build ships, right? there was a book club recently where some woman, so very prestigious professional, she was sort of a partial CEO, so she's a fractional CEO of really large healthcare companies, and she said that was her favorite part of the book. Like, and she said that book should be it. She said my Deming book should be an MBA. So I'm now bragging, it's part of an MBA program. But she said, but I got to tell you, the best part of the book was what you did with your mother, right? And like that's another thing, right? Like AI is not going to do that. Again, AI's like we can go through the pros and the cons, right? But like the context matters. Like if you read my books, and again, Deming, I mean Derek, not Deming, Derek was incredibly, that's why it always says with, even though it's like originally I hired him, now we're collaborate together. Our next book will be a co-author. In fact, we co-authored Profound Stories. But like it's your story. It's the there's if you read those two books, but Rebels of Reason, or three, Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge, Profound Stories, and Rebels of Reason, like read them, and then you'll see like AI could not have done the narratives that we created. And people, like example in Rebels of Reason, most people who know Claude Shannon. Claude Shannon is sort of the father of information theory. Like, I mean, he's a big deal in AI, which you don't hear of that often. But what you will never find, or you literally, AI is not going to pull this out of the closet, is that he used to ride on a unicycle juggling in the famous Bell Labs. It's a great story. You don't get that without sort of digging for context and looking for a story that just, having the mind that like you might have about how you think about something that's funny or interesting. That like again, we're very pro AI. Like we use the heck out of it, and we probably will at some point write a book. What we'll probably do is prototype a book that's been written by AI, and then Derek will probably clean it up. That's going to happen. Maybe probably not the next one, but maybe the one after. We don't know. But again, context matters, and like the Bill Gates, the efficiency and the inefficiency is important if you don't have a method.
And AI, something you've got to be careful with. Everybody knows that AI can hallucinate. But even whenever AI is writing with clarity, like with Deming, there were a couple of different anecdotes and a couple of different quotes, and you could. I mean, I went through the internet trying to track down the original source, because you don't really want to quote something unless you can look at the original source to know this is for. You can't just go off of hearsay. And I literally cannot count how many times that what we would find, if somebody said this, that this person was just quoting this person who was just quoting this person who was just quoting another one. So it's this game of telephone. And there was no original source. There was just somebody that one time said, I think I remember. And so AI, it goes through and scrapes the internet, and if it finds 1,000 people saying the same story, it assumes, well, this must be the story, without being able to look into the end of it. In fact, we just did this just last week. We had originally thought that somewhere.
Yeah, I can tell. Let me tell, because it's kind of really, like, so, I was very afraid that the Deming crowd wasn't going to like my Profound Journey, because these are old time Deming people that I never met Deming, they met him, right? And they've been incredibly embracive of the Deming book we wrote. But this one guy that I've done a podcast, he got a preview version of I forget what version he got of the Deming book, but he got a preview version of it, and we had this story about like Deming made this quote that like, and I know it's somewhere out there, but by the time we got to the final draft, and I want to talk about sources because this is really important too, where in A, and I know all about, but AI has this. People talk about this human in the middle, right? So this is a good human in the middle. So by the time we got to the final, like going through, and I think even Derek in his 15 years of doing this got some schooling with Leah Thompson from IT Revolution on sources and references. She was just like the Catholic school teacher, a brilliant, like beautiful person, but slapping your wrist every.
You're Catholic, so you can get away with
Yeah. But like it's. I think even Derek now is paranoid, because when we did Rebels of Reason, he was like, "Yeah, no, we got to get these all up front, because we spent so many time." And the reason I want two things. One is to finish that story. We took it out of the final version because we couldn't find the source, right? And so Derek's the original source. Even though I know it was out there, I didn't make it up. But like at the end of the day, we sort of bit the bullet. It was a great story. Something Deming was quoted on, but here's the other thing that's really important. Like, again, I don't know that you're going to get with base AI. The thing I'm very proud about in both of my sort of my two books, the two main books, which is Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge and the recent Rebels of Reason, is if you look at the index of that book or you look at the references, that's what I do. When I go to look for, I want to read a book, I primarily read books that help me learn new stuff. I'm a learner. And I mean, I can learn stuff from fiction and I can have fun, but if I have free time, I want to read a book about Duran or I want to read a book. And the first thing I look at in the book is I look at the index and I go to see what all the references are. And that will tell me if this is a book I should even bother reading by reading the index. So if you're a learner, I mean, am I going to learn from this book? The index will tell me, and one, it may have all the things I want to learn, but I'm probably not going to waste my time if I don't see in the index a bunch of things that, yeah, I definitely want to learn about that. That's something I've heard about. But then to back that up, I want to see the references, the citations and the references. And those are the two things that sell me on buying a book where my sole goal of that book is to learn something. Unless it's like a personal recommendation, like some friend says, I guarantee you're going to love this book, John. Like if I don't know you and I want to read this book, and what I'm so proud of, and probably mostly because we were like well trained from Leah and the IT Revolution, who publishes the Deming Handbook and Phoenix Project and a lot of other books, was be sort of religious on citations and references and again, that's sort of context matters, right? Like that's going to be really important in your book. Again, we'll talk about sourcing and references in the workshop, and it's something that you're gonna like. I think it's something you have to sort of check box, and you may decide not to do it. Indexing is a pain in the ass, Like I'm finally done with the book, and like, oh yeah, now you got to do the index. Like it's not trivial, and so, but anyway.
Well, I think probably my next time. I mean, we could stay on AI, good and bad, and the different ways to use it. But in preparation for this episode, I kind of mapped the Frankendraft method against all the different ways that you and I have used AI, either with your books or in your newsletter or some of the stuff that I've done with some of my other authors. And, I mean, after seeing it all in one place, seeing the whole list, it makes me appreciate just how powerful of a tool that AI has become. And so, I mean, we're going to talk about the 5 steps in the Frankendraft method and the different things that you can do in there. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. So whenever people say, can you use AI to write a book? That's too simple of a question. The devil's in the details. So after we go through all of this, I hope it puts to bed the question of, can I use AI? You can, and not only can you, but I think that you should, as long as you do it deliberately, intentionally, and ethically.
Okay. And, it goes back to the thing we've said over and over, like, what the goal of this workshop is give you, a method, a methodology to understand if there's a book that you need to write. And then again, ultimately, you're the one at the end of the second day is going to decide, do I have a book in me? But like, again, AI doesn't answer that question for you. The Frankendraft method does, or at least the sort of the retreat part of it definitely helps you understand. And again, I can tell you from my own experience of being involved now in 5 retreats, 3 of them are my own, 2 more other people, that process literally, answers that question. Can you talk a little about the Frankendraft method and how you see AI interacting with it?
Yeah. Sort of, quickly give people a rundown of the Frankendraft method, something I've developed over 16, however many years of doing this. And I've got it down to kind of 5 steps, if you will. I used to call it a process, but after looking at what's the difference between a process and a method, I realized that it's really a method because it's not just about the step-by-step process. It's also about the mindset, the mentality, the context we've been talking about, if you will. So with the first step, grave robbing, that's about gathering all your ideas and bits and pieces, kind of all the fodder for the book, right? So with the Frankenstein monster theme, this would be Dr. Frankenstein sending Igor out into the into the countryside to rob graves and find the different body parts for putting together a complete Frankenstein. That's the idea of grave robbing. This is ugly stuff, and none of it is something that you would show somebody else, but it becomes the ingredients, the building blocks, if you will.
And Derek, so people might be a little confused, and I think we didn't really talk about, like, why do you call it the Frankendraft method? Because I think that's
Yeah,
sort of a really interesting part of the process, and I think people might be losing that if they don't understand. Because it's not the end process, right? It is a state to get to that allows you to. So there's like, all right, let me say this, and I want you to re-explain this. But the first sort of question you have to ask is, do I have a book in me, right? Is this a book I want to write? The second question is, when you get to a point where there is the formulation of a book, is this the book I want to write? And I think that's what you call the Frankendraft, right?
yeah. So Frankendraft is not only the name of the process, but it's the name of the third step, the Frankendraft. And it is because the way that I say it is you can't start writing your book until you have your book written. And that sounds like a paradox, but what I mean is that in the process of creating your manuscript draft, you go through so many ideas and evolutions and iterations that often by the end of the first, or at least the way that I do it, you have a draft, but it's not really, it's a manuscript draft that you would want to show your mother or anybody else. It is ugly. It's not something that's ready to be published. But you have to go through the process of writing that draft before you really discover the book that you're really writing. So the example with us is in writing Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge. We had to write the Frankendraft, but it wasn't until we had that moment of that epiphany, that lightning strike, I sometimes call it, that you finally realize this is not a biography and this is not a handbook. This is not even actually about Deming himself, but about Deming's journey to how he arrived at his masterpiece, his legacy for the world, which is the system of profound knowledge. And that has, four different parts. And so the book is divided into, these four parts. This is where he got the lens of systems. This is where he got the lens of psychology. And so we had like all the bits and pieces and the ingredients and the stories. But once you had that lightning strike, then all of a sudden, that's the book we're writing.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I call it, you put this, Frankenstein monster of a body together and it looks like it's shaping up, but it's not until
Yeah.
you have the lightning strike that all of a sudden
Yeah.
it comes alive. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah, no, for me, you talked about that, and it was even more prominent in Rebels of Reason, the history of AI, of like this idea that, again, like, I'm not anti AI, right? Like, I'm very pro AI, and like I'm not going to criticize anybody who wants to write a book fully with AI, but like I think you lose, based on my experience, the iterative process. In other words, the Frankendraft is the can it get off the table and walk, right? And and like, again, A, having a lot of fun, two, context matters, and three, being a really good book. Is you got to write the book before you write the book, as you say. And the process of writing the book to write the book is where you learn, like you sort of learn first off, do I want to write it? Am I going to write this book? The next thing you've got to learn is what the book really is going to be about, because like we've had, it was like we can tell story after story of how we get to a point and we literally get, oh, holy no, we got a problem here. I mean, look, the Rebels of Reason, great example. Rebels of Reason seemed real easy. We had like an outline of a bunch of characters, from like Ada Lovelace to Turing to like all these famous computer science and AI historical figures, right, all the way through. Like we had that. And as we started getting into it and we started writing, we realized there was this problem in AI, which was like there was so many different threads that we had lots of different timelines. And I always joked that like we were going to write a book that would give the reader whiplash, because we'd get to 1980 and then have to go back to 1950 and then go back to 1990, and it'd be like a really bad Tarantino movie, right? And then so we sat back and we actually stepped back from it and said, we got a problem here. And we were like 4 months into this. We had made, like, we'd gone through the sort of the methods of grave robbing. We've gone through all these processes. We hadn't quite gotten the full Frankendraft done. And to your credit, Derek, you sort of like thought about it. We kind of threw a bunch of ideas, and Derek said, well, why don't we do it by different senses? Like AI learns to read, AI learns to count, AI learns to see, AI learns to hear. And it solved our whole timeline because we could be linear on each sense, but we didn't have to apologize when we got to learning to see from learning to read, or right. And again, that would have never happened had we just sort of plopped an outline into AI. We had to learn, like, because what you're doing is you're constantly reading the book. So, I mean, can you write a book in a day? Absolutely, with AI. Will you learn how to write the book in a way that's just going to be incredibly better without it? Everything we know about, like, feedback loops, and like we talk about DevOps, and for those who know DevOps, we talk about different things. You need feedback loops, and the Frankendraft method is ultimately, even from the 2-day this is the first time we're going to run it, but the 2-day sort of workshop is a feedback loop for you to make the first step. Working your way through grave robbing is another form of feedback. You're learning. And all right, so continue. I hijacked, but you talk about. I wanted people to understand what Frankendraft was. So I'm sorry. Go back to the grave robbing.
I mean, but that's the gist of the big idea, is that you have to go through these iterations, these feedback loops. And whenever I worked with a couple of testers, couple of QA guys out of London, whenever I was describing my Frankendraft process to them, they said, "Oh, that sounds like agile development, where you create and then
Yeah,
you go back and then you come in." And once they explained it to me, I was like, "Yeah, that's
exactly what it is.
exactly what it is." And so that's what you do. You create something on a small scale, you examine it, you go back. So Frankendraft, like I said, that's the centerpiece. That's the main part of it, and it's really the whole gist of it, is that you have to create this ugly thing. You have to get it out before you even really know what you're doing. And
And I
most people, that's they
And what I
never.
love about it, and I wanted you to still go through the process. We talked about Grey Robin. There's 3 other processes. We know Frankendraft one of them, but one of the other things I love about Frankendraft, which I thought was, I think another enabling of sort of people getting stuck. Right, you're starting to write, and you start worrying about your grammar. You start worrying about, like, okay, like, I've written now 20,000 words, and now did I call him Dr. Deming or Edward? Like I love your sort of simplistic, like, we don't worry about that stuff in Frankendraft. We just write. Like, we fix that in the 4th step, right? Which we'll talk about. So yeah, you talked about grave robbing. Talk about the other, 3. We talked about Frankendraft was the 3rd step, but
Yeah. So first step, grave robbing, gathering all these ideas. The second step, I've called it a number of things over the years, and I think what we've settled on is just calling it the sandbox, because it's just taken all of the stuff that you have gathered and put together, all these little building blocks and whatnot, and you just start putting it together and see what's there. So playing in the sandbox, putting Legos together. I've called it the blueprints. I've called it, but it's basically trying to create parts of your book at scale to see what you're really working with. Whether it's like, this is the direction that we're going. Then there's Frankendraft, which we've talked about. But then, once you have that lightning strike, then you go into step 4, the rebuild. And I've called it the rewrite. I've called it the revision, and it just depends on what it really is going to be in the reality for you. But this is like, once we had that lightning strike, once we finally know the book we're writing about, all the ugly stuff, all the bits and pieces and parts, it's all of a sudden you can see it through the lens of the clarity of your vision for the book. And whether that means rearranging parts of it, rewriting parts of it, writing new parts of it, whatever it takes to get it from being this ugly monster to this new vision that you finally arrived at. That's what you do in the rebuild. And then the last step is, I call it pitchforks and fire, because it's whenever you're getting ready to throw open the castle gates and let your Frankenstein monster go out into the world. It's about preparing it for the masses, if you will. And the masses, they can be encouraging, but they can also be, kind of brutal, and you've got to be ready for both of those.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit in the workshop about like I'm sorry, the that idea of the pitchforks too. I mean, even for me, I've thought a lot about like after doing the first book, the Deming book. Again, the other books that are co-authored where there were a lot of moving parts, but my first sort of book that I wrote by myself with with Derek's help, and like I remember the first read was one of my best friends who is a high IQ reader who just I wanted to jump off my roof. I was so depressed. I thought I'd written the greatest book ever, and he was like an older brother yelling at me, like, "Why did you forgot to do this? What the hell are you trying to say here?" Like I mean, it was just and like it was great. At the time I felt like, I was like, my friend Curtis, Curtis, you gotta read my book, it's gonna be amazing. He like a week later he's screaming at me, and like that's gotta happen. Like that, like because and it was little things. Like it wasn't like we had to read it was a great book. It was just like this is the other part. What was in my head wasn't being translated to the page. And like I again trying like not sort of chip away at the AI argument for but like AI is not going to be what's in your head, and it's going to make the same mistake you make by not probably connecting the dots directly like that. I mean, our whole revision process for the Deming book was literally realizing we knew this was true. We didn't tell it to the reader.
Now, making a plug for the Frankendraft Method, and also in my defense, you might remember that I cautioned you against sharing the manuscript with anybody else too early.
That's right. Yeah.
Things happen like they needed to happen. I'm glad that Curtis came in. He gave us some great feedback that probably saved that not probably that did save us time on the back end. But you've got to be careful about what you do at what step in the process. The rules are there for a reason.
That's right.
But getting down into the nitty gritty of it, if we're looking at how do we specifically use AI in each of these different steps. With grave robbing, one of the things that I like best, I'm doing this with. In fact, I'm writing a book on how to use the Frankendraft method. One thing that I love to do is while I'm on the highway, by myself, I'll turn on the recorder, and I will just do stream of consciousness, talk about different stories and things that have come, and tips and advice and insights. And there's no organization to it. I'm just going down the interstate at 70, 80 miles an hour, just kind of talking off the top of my head. But whenever I get back to my desk, I can load that transcript into Chat GPT or Claude, depending on which one's behaving right that day. And I instruct it, don't the word, maybe you can take out the fillers and some other stuff, but take the literal transcript and then divide the different topics up by paragraph. So I've got that stream of consciousness organized into coherent blocks. And John, that process
Yeah.
used to take
Yeah.
weeks. Like I said, I would take the audio, send it to my transcriptionist. She would send back the transcript, and then I would have to read through the whole thing. And then I would have to make the page breaks and come up with the headings. And AI can do for me in a matter of seconds what it used to take me weeks to do, because I would be reading and processing from 20 to 30 hours worth of an author retreat. And AI does it in moments and does a good job of it. So then, even though it's my words, AI has made it much more accessible for me to immediately start having productive use of it. It helps me get to a point where I can actually start adding value faster instead of just doing the drudgery work to get there in the first place.
I definitely. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that, again, the first book we wrote, you were still using sort of the transcript service, right? And, now, sort of in the sandbox, the idea that you can sort of take all the recordings and, as you're going through the grave robbing and consolidating, now you can take all that sort of sandbox to help you. It's just a lot of shortcuts. I think, one of the things that me and Derek use a lot is we'll use different tools, Miro boards and stuff like that, right? Again, I think these are helpful, someday we should publish some of the Miro boards we had, at least for the AI book. It was sort of brilliant, right? Like how we were sort of like, it helped us formulate a lot of stuff. Again, I think these are important, as you're moving from grave robbing to sandbox, using some of the tools that were same kind of tools that we use for developing products. That's the other thing too, right? Like, I'll say this to the coders in the world. I don't think you would develop a core application completely written by AI. Would you write a fair amount of the code of the core application with AI? Absolutely. Would you architect it and write it all? Probably not. Especially if it's sort of very high consequence systems, right? Well, your book is a high consequence systems, right? Like you're going to dedicate a good part of your life to it. And so again, helping sort of architect your book, not too dissimilar to architecting software. So you think about the tools that you use in architecting software. You use things like Kanban boards, you use Miro boards, you use collaborative, you sort of collaborate with your workers, so in your case it'd be collaborating with, I mean, I agree with Derek. I might have prematurely sent the Deming book, but it was far enough along, I think, in my defense. But
Well, and Curtis, I mean, Curtis was, I mean, like almost a,
Well, I
brother.
mean, like, if I think about the Deming book, and not too dissimilar of some of the people, I mean, I reached out to three people once we had the general outline. So, and like Ben Rockwood, Ben Rockwood. It was Damon Edwards, who was incredibly helpful. So I had mentors throughout the process. So these were collaborators while I was writing the book, and then Curtis, right, and Damon. So again, another great example is I told two examples. I told Damon about the Deming book. And we pretty much we were pretty deep into sandbox and structure. And I called him and I called all three when I was thinking about the red book. Hey, is this a good idea? But then when we got through sandbox, I individually briefed each one of them. And Damon had said, hey, if you could tie in they just come out with the book Working Backwards, which is sort of like how Amazon has been incredibly successful, right? Two authors are pretty high up in the chain, documented the whole Bezos and all the methodology working backwards. And in the there's a lot of buzz on Amazon right now. If you can tie Deming to influencing Amazon, so we did some research, and there was a lot of there. Talk about Jeff Wilke, but then it like opened up the door to the last third of the book was what would Deming do after he died. Like, so that was like a whole. And so one of my negative critiques, I got like a lot of 5 stars on Amazon. I think the one 4-star I got was the guy was mad that we didn't write the whole book about what would Deming do,
Yeah.
the whole last third, right? And that was all through the collaborative effort of a friend. And then the same thing in Rebels of Reason. The whole idea of it being a concept of rebels came from my friend Damon. I told him about the book when I was going to write it. We got past a certain stage of like the grave robbing and sandbox. We were about to start Frankendraft, and I explained it. We might even been into Frankendraft at that point. And he said, it sounds like your book is more about a bunch of rebels. And we had already had all these great stories of people. And I thought, no, they are all rebels. They're all told they can't do it. They're told they're being wasting their time, and we sat back and we rethought like the good news, we had all the stories. We just had to re-engineer the bookends of each story about why they were rebel. But that came through collaborative. And again, this is all part of a system that Derek's been, maturing for 15 years. And now how many years we've been working together? I forget. It's been,
Since
it's COVID. Yeah. So literally, it's like
5
21
years.
or 20. Yeah. It's 5 years. Yeah. So I feel like I'm like deeply in this process. And that's why I think I've been talking to Derek for quite a while. Like, could we turn this into something we can get more people? And like, I think the timing just wasn't right until now to be able to sort of share this with people. And again, do you want to write a book? Like, it's the only question you got to understand in this whole podcast. If you want to write a book that you think you can sell, then come to Atlanta.
You're talking about sharing the outline. So with some people, the way that I start talking about step two, it is an outline, but it isn't. And I've
Yeah,
thought about it as an expanded table of contents. Thought about it as, but what it is just playing around with your stuff at a small scale to figure out if this is what it is. So I'll give you an example of something that what I have done and what I just started to do just a few months ago. I did this for the first time. So with with any author, part of what we do in step two is help find the right voice for the book. So for some people, they want something that's a bit more academic. Some want something that's a bit more edgy. So what I like to do is is I write like a mini book, if you will. So kind of like 1 to 3 pages per chapter that we think might come together. And I'll write this one in one voice and this one in another voice and this one in a different voice so that, we can see what feels right. And not only what feels right to the author, but we've got to have that magical connection between the reader that we've identified. How are they going to best receive it? So something that I did different a few months ago was I wrote, kind of this miniature chapter, and then I gave it to Claude, and I said, I want you to rewrite, this exact content, but in more academic prose. This one more business. This one. So in just a matter of minutes, I had something so I could show the author, this is what I'm talking about. Whenever I say, do we write business casual, do we write it more edgy? And it was the exact same content, but in multiple forms in just a matter of minutes. Now, I didn't have AI write the thing to start with. I wrote it. Another example of just how AI can multiply your efforts. And if you have good effort, it magnifies the efficiency.
Yeah, no, it's a great example of how using AI to complement this method, right? In other words, like again, back to the Bill Gates quote, right? Like, in other words, if you have an efficient model or method, these things will be, this technology will sort of save you time, enhance your capabilities. But like if you don't have an efficient method, like that's a good example, like you would just sort of write, never take the opportunity to use AI to put it in different voices, reread those voices, maybe share those voices with some really close, zero patient readers, as I'd call them, or patient zero readers, and see what they think, sort of like mull it through. Again, that's the art of writing a great book means all these things, right? I think like if you shortcut one, maybe you'll get away with it. Shortcut two, you won't have a great book. Shortcut three, you might have a terrible book. Well, I think we put a good overview on what our thoughts are about AI and writing, what the Frankendraft method looks like basically by itself, but with AI, and what I think you might expect if you come to our workshop in Atlanta.
Yeah, and I really hope that for my writing and publishing colleagues, that it gives you a different perspective on what it means to write books with
Okay.
AI.
That's right, with AI. Good. Yep.
All right, until next time.